The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine corridors of the Galactic Academy, where the future leaders of a dozen worlds gathered to learn the arts of diplomacy, warfare, and governance. Students from across the known galaxy walked these halls, their forms as diverse as the stars themselves. Tall, elegant Altarians with their crystalline skin that caught and reflected light like living prisms, bulky Corvan warriors whose thick hides could deflect energy blasts, the ethereal Xanathi, who seemed to float rather than walk, their translucent forms shimmering with internal light. And then there was Sarah Chen. She sat in the back corner of Advanced Tactical Studies, hunched over her datapad, trying to make herself as invisible as possible. At barely 5.5 feet tall, with unremarkable brown hair and pale skin that seemed almost ghostly compared to the vibrant hues of her classmates, she succeeded more often than she liked. Her species, humans, were among the newest additions to the Galactic Confederation, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 50 years ago. They were considered primitive by most standards, their technology crude, their lifespans laughably short. Pathetic, whispered Zixthera, a reptilian from the Vega system, her forked tongue flicking out as she spoke. Look at the little mammal scribbling away like it actually matters. The comment drew snickers from nearby students. Sarah's cheeks burned, but she kept her eyes fixed on her notes. She had learned early that fighting back only made things worse. Better to endure the mockery and focus on why she was here. Professor HFY, a distinguished Altarian whose crystal formations had turned deep blue with age, stood at the front of the lecture hall. His voice resonated with harmonic overtones that made translation unnecessary for most species. Today we examine the Battle of Kepler 442b, where a single tactical decision changed the course of the Third Expansion War. The holographic display activated, showing a three-dimensional battlefield floating above their heads. Ships moved in slow motion. Energy beams traced lazy arcs through space, and explosions bloomed like deadly flowers. Sarah leaned forward, her earlier embarrassment forgotten. Military history fascinated her in ways she couldn't fully explain. The hegemony forces held a 3-to-1 advantage, Professor HFY continued. Their ships were faster, their weapons more advanced. Victory seemed inevitable. He paused, his crystalline features catching the light from the hologram. Who can tell me what the Confederate forces did to turn the tide? Hands shot up around the room. Massive Corvan arms, delicate Xanathi appendages, and serpentine reptilian limbs all vied for attention. Sarah hesitated, then slowly raised her own hand. The professor's compound eyes swiveled across the room, deliberately passing over Sarah multiple times before settling on Grextar, a Corvan whose bulk made the reinforced chair groan under his weight. They used the asteroid field for cover, Grextar rumbled, his voice like grinding stone. Forced the hegemony into close combat where numbers mattered less. Partially correct, Professor HFY acknowledged, but incomplete. Anyone else? More hands rose. Sarah kept hers up, though she noticed several classmates glancing at her with amusement. What could the primitive human possibly know that others had missed? The answer lies not in what they did, but in what they sacrificed, Professor HFY said when no one provided the complete answer. The Confederate admiral ordered 3 ships to ram the hegemony dreadnoughts, suicide attacks that crippled the enemy's largest vessels and created chaos in their formations. A collective murmur ran through the class. Suicide tactics were considered barbaric by most civilized species, a relic of less evolved times. Wasteful, declared Othsalar, a Xanathi whose form pulsed with disapproval. Surely there were more elegant solutions. Perhaps, the professor agreed. But effectiveness cannot be measured by elegance alone. The Confederate forces won that day, saving countless worlds from hegemony occupation. His gaze finally settled on Sarah. Miss Chen, you seemed eager to contribute. Do you have thoughts on this strategy? The room fell silent. Sarah felt dozens of alien eyes upon her, most filled with barely concealed contempt or amusement. Her mouth went dry, but she forced herself to speak. The crews knew they wouldn't survive, she said quietly. But they did it anyway because something was more important than their own lives. That's not barbaric. That's heroic. Laughter erupted from several corners of the room. Zixthera's hiss was particularly loud. Typical human sentimentality. You romanticize death because your species lacks the intelligence for proper strategy. Silence. Professor HFY's voice carried harmonics that made the walls vibrate. The laughter died instantly. Miss Chen raises an interesting point about motivation and sacrifice. These are factors often overlooked in purely tactical analysis. Sarah felt a brief moment of vindication, but it was quickly crushed by the hostile stares of her classmates. She had marked herself as different as other. In a galaxy where conformity to galactic norms was prized, being different was dangerous. The rest of the lecture passed in a blur. Sarah took notes mechanically, her mind elsewhere. When the class finally ended, she gathered her things quickly, hoping to escape before more mockery could find her. Chen, the voice belonged to Vraktos, a Corvin even larger than Grextar. He moved to block her path, his massive form casting her in shadow. You think you're smart, little human? You think your species knows something the rest of us don't? I don't think anything, Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady. I was just answering the professor's question. With primitive human emotions, Zixthara added, slithering up beside Vraktos. Your kind hasn't evolved beyond base instincts. Perhaps that's why you'll never amount to anything in the real galaxy. Other students gathered around, forming a loose circle. Not all participated in the harassment, but none moved to stop it either. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced herself to stand straight. At least I'm here, she said quietly. At least I'm trying. The words seemed to enrage Vraktos. His thick hands clenched into fists, and for a moment Sarah thought he might actually strike her. The Corvin stepped closer, using his bulk to intimidate. You don't belong here, human. Your species is a cosmic accident, a footnote in galactic history. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be for everyone. Sarah felt something break inside her, not from despair, but from a sudden, fierce determination. She looked up at the towering alien, then at the circle of faces surrounding her. Some showed open hostility, others mere indifference, but all saw her as lesser. Maybe you're right, she said, her voice gaining strength. Maybe humans are just a footnote. But every great story needs footnotes. They're where you find the most interesting details. With that, she pushed past the startled Corvin and walked away, leaving confused murmurs in her wake. She didn't see Professor Kethavar watching from the doorway, his crystalline features unreadable, or notice the slight nod he gave as she passed. Sarah's quarters were smaller than a closet by most species standards, but humans required less space than their galactic neighbors. The walls displayed a rotating selection of images from Earth: mountain ranges, ocean sunsets, forests thick with green life. She found comfort in these reminders of home, especially after days like today. She sat cross-legged on her narrow bed, reviewing her notes from advanced tactical studies. The Battle of Kepler 442b fascinated her for reasons beyond academic interest. 3 ships, 847 crew members, all choosing certain death to save millions they would never meet. The galactic database listed it as a footnote to the larger battle, but Sarah saw something else entirely. A soft chime indicated someone at her door. Sarah frowned, checking the time. It was well past the evening meal, and she had no friends who might visit. The door's small viewport showed Professor Keithvar standing in the corridor, his crystalline form refracting the hallway lights into rainbow patterns. Sarah's heart rate spiked. Professors didn't visit student quarters unless something was seriously wrong. Had her confrontation with Vraktos been reported? Was she being expelled? She opened the door with trembling fingers. Professor, is everything all right? May I come in, Miss Chen? His harmonic voice was softer than usual, less formal. I believe we should talk. Sarah stepped aside, suddenly aware of how cramped her quarters must seem to someone accustomed to the vast crystal chambers of Altair. Professor Kethavar entered gracefully, his tall form somehow managing not to make the space feel even smaller. Please sit, he said, settling himself on the room's single chair with fluid movements. I witnessed the incident after class today. Sarah's stomach dropped. I didn't start anything, Professor. I was just trying to leave. I know. His compound eyes reflected the Earth images on her walls. Tell me, Miss Chen, why are you here? At the academy, I mean. The question caught her off guard. To learn, sir. To represent humanity in the Confederation. A diplomatic answer. The blue crystals of his forehead darkened slightly, indicating amusement in Altarian body language, but not complete. What drives you personally? Sarah hesitated. The truth felt too large, too presumptuous for someone like her to voice. But something in the professor's patient manner encouraged honesty. I want to prove we're more than they think we are, she said finally. Humans, I mean. Everyone sees us as primitive, violent, short-lived. Maybe they're right about some of it, but we're also more. We can be more. Professor Kethavar nodded slowly. Your answer in class today was insightful. Most students focus on tactics and technology, but you saw the human element, the choice to sacrifice for others. It wasn't brilliant strategy, Sarah admitted. It was just human. Exactly. The professor leaned forward. Miss Chen, how much do you know about the Academy's true purpose? Sir? Sarah blinked in confusion. It's an educational institution for future galactic leaders. On the surface, yes. But the Academy serves another function, one not widely advertised. Professor Kethvar's crystals shifted to deep purple, indicating serious contemplation. We identify individuals with unique perspectives, those who might see solutions others cannot. The Confederation faces challenges that traditional thinking cannot solve. Sarah felt a chill of premonition. What kind of challenges? Are you familiar with the Devourers, Miss Chen? The name sent ice through Sarah's veins. Everyone in the galaxy knew about the Devourers, though most preferred not to think about them. They were the nightmare lurking at the edge of known space, a force so alien and hostile that entire sectors had been evacuated rather than face them. They're why the Confederation was formed, Sarah said quietly, to present a united front against the threat. Correct, but what you may not know is that our united front is failing. Professor Kethvar's crystals darkened to near black. 3 more systems fell to them last month. Our fleets cannot match their technology. Our strategies cannot predict their movements. They consume everything in their path, leaving empty space where worlds once flourished. Sarah's mouth went dry. How long before they reach the core systems? 18 months, perhaps 2 years at current advancement rates. The professor's words fell like stones into still water. The Council of Species has exhausted conventional options. Military force fails, diplomatic contact is impossible, and retreat only delays the inevitable. Then why tell me this? Sarah's voice came out smaller than she intended. I'm nobody. Just a human student who gets laughed at in class. Because sometimes, Miss Chen, the greatest insights come from the most unexpected sources. Professor Kethvar stood, his crystals shifting back to their usual blue. Your species has something unique, something the older races have forgotten or perhaps never possessed. What's that? The willingness to sacrifice everything for others. The ability to find hope in impossible situations. The refusal to accept defeat even when logic demands surrender. His compound eyes fixed on her. These are not primitive traits despite what your classmates believe. They are the rarest qualities in the galaxy. Sarah stood as well, her mind reeling. You think humans might have answers that others don't? I think, Professor Kethvar said carefully, that traditional solutions have failed because traditional thinking created them. The Devourers represent a threat beyond conventional understanding. Perhaps it requires unconventional minds to meet it. A long silence stretched between them. Sarah stared at the images of Earth on her walls, thinking of the billions of humans who had no idea their species might hold the key to galactic survival. What happens now? She asked. Now you continue your studies, but I will be watching your progress with particular interest. Professor Kethvar moved toward the door, then paused. Miss Chen, there are others like me at the Academy. Professors who see potential where others see problems. You are not as alone as you believe. After he left, Sarah sat in the growing darkness of her quarters, too stunned to activate the lights. The conversation felt surreal, like something from one of the adventure novels she had loved as a child. But the professor's words carried the weight of truth. She thought about the 3 ships at Kepler 442b, about crews who had chosen death over surrender, about her human ancestors who had faced extinction events and somehow survived, about the laughter of her classmates and their certainty that humanity had nothing to offer the galactic community. Perhaps they were wrong. Perhaps being different wasn't a weakness but a strength waiting to be recognized. Sarah activated her terminal and began reviewing everything she could find about the Devourers. If humanity was meant to play a role in stopping them, she intended to be ready. The galaxy might see her as just another primitive human, but she was beginning to understand that might be exactly what was needed. Outside her small window, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, beautiful and cold. Somewhere among them, the Devourers continued their relentless advance toward the heart of galactic civilization, and in a tiny room on a space station, one young human began to prepare for a destiny she couldn't yet imagine. The weeks following Professor Kethvar's visit passed in a blur of intensive study. Sarah threw herself into her coursework with renewed purpose, devouring everything the Academy's vast databases contained about the Devourers. What she found was more disturbing than she had imagined. The first contact had occurred 73 years ago, when a Corvin exploration fleet encountered strange energy signatures in the Void Reach sector. The ship sent to investigate simply vanished. No distress signals, no debris, no trace except for electromagnetic echoes that made sensitive equipment scream warnings before going silent. More ships disappeared. Then entire outposts. The pattern was always the same. A faint energy signature would appear at the edge of sensor range, growing stronger until it overwhelmed all detection equipment. When the interference cleared, whatever had been there was gone, leaving only empty space that somehow felt wrong to any living being who entered it. The first visual contact came from an automated probe that managed to transmit 47 seconds of footage before its signal cut out. The images showed ships unlike anything in galactic records. Massive constructs that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They moved without visible propulsion, defying known physics with their impossible maneuvers. But the most disturbing aspect wasn't their technology. It was what they did to the places they visited. Planets stripped of all organic matter, stars that grew dim and cold. Even the quantum foam of space itself seemed damaged in their wake, as if the fundamental forces of reality had been partially erased. Sarah read report after report, cross-referencing tactical analyses with scientific studies. The Confederation's best minds had proposed dozens of theories about the Devourer's nature and motivations, but none explained their complete immunity to conventional weapons or their ability to make entire fleets simply cease to exist. Fascinating reading? Sarah looked up from her terminal to find a figure she didn't recognize standing in the Academy's main library. The being appeared humanoid at first glance, but closer inspection revealed subtle differences that marked them as Veil Walker, one of the more mysterious species in the Confederation. They had silver-white skin that seemed to shimmer with its own light, and eyes that held depths no purely physical organ should possess. Professor Veltar. Sarah had heard the name but never seen the reclusive instructor who taught advanced xenobiology. "I'm sorry, I didn't hear you approach." "Veil walkers move quietly," the professor said with what might have been amusement. "May I sit? I find your research interest intriguing." Sarah gestured to the chair across from her, suddenly self-conscious about the dozens of files covering her workstation. Professor Veltar settled gracefully, their movements fluid in a way that suggested they weren't entirely bound by normal physical laws. "You've been studying the Devourers for 18 days straight," Professor Veltar observed. "Most students avoid that particular subject. It tends to cause nightmares." "Someone has to understand them," Sarah replied. "If we're going to stop them." "Ah." The professor's eyes deepened, becoming pools of silver light. "You believe they can be stopped?" "Everything can be stopped," Sarah said with more confidence than she felt. "We just haven't figured out how yet." "An admirable sentiment. Tell me, what have you concluded from your research?" Sarah hesitated. Her theories felt absurd when considered from a galactic perspective, but Professor Veltar waited with patient attention. "I think we're approaching this wrong," she said finally. "Everyone focuses on their technology, their weapons, their tactics. But what if those aren't the important things?" "Continue." "The reports all mention the same thing. Wherever the Devourers go, they leave emptiness behind. Not just destroyed matter, but actual emptiness, like they're removing something fundamental from reality itself." Sarah pulled up a three-dimensional map showing the Devourer's expansion pattern. "Look at this. It's not random. There's a pattern to which systems they target." Professor Veltar leaned forward, studying the holographic display. "I see systems rich in resources, strategic locations, populated worlds. Standard military objectives, that's what everyone assumes. But look closer." Sarah highlighted specific points on the map. Here, and here. These are systems they bypassed completely, even though they contained more valuable resources than the ones they destroyed. And here's what those bypassed systems have in common. The professor's expression grew thoughtful as Sarah overlaid additional data. They contain species with strong communal bonds, hive minds, symbiotic relationships, cultures built around collective consciousness. Exactly. The Devourers don't attack technology or even life itself. They attack something else entirely. Sarah's voice grew excited as her theory took shape. "I think they're feeding on individualism, on the spark that makes each being unique and separate from others." Professor Veltar sat back, their shimmer brightening. "That is a remarkable hypothesis, but how could such a thing be possible?" "I don't know the mechanics," Sarah admitted, "but it explains their immunity to conventional weapons. You can't shoot a concept. You can't outmaneuver a force that exists in a different dimension of reality. And yet you believe they can be stopped. Sarah nodded firmly. If they feed on individualism, then maybe the opposite could hurt them. Unity. Not just military alliance, but something deeper. Real connection between beings who choose to stand together despite their differences. The very thing the Confederation lacks, Professor Veltar murmured. Our alliance is one of convenience, not genuine unity. Which is why we're losing. Sarah closed the files and looked directly at the professor. The older species are too set in their ways, too convinced of their own superiority. They can't truly unite because they can't see beyond their own perspectives. But humans could. The question hung in the air between them. Sarah thought about her classmates' mockery, about the casual dismissal her species faced throughout the galaxy, but she also thought about the stories Professor Kethvar had shared, about sacrifice and hope in impossible circumstances. Humans are used to being underdogs, she said quietly. We've spent our entire history bringing together different groups against common threats. We know how to build bridges between enemies because we've had to do it to survive. Professor Veltar stood, their form seeming to become more translucent. Miss Chen, I have a question for you. If you were given the opportunity to test your theory, would you take it? What do you mean? The Confederation Council meets next month to discuss new strategies against the Devourers. They will consider any proposal that offers genuine hope. The professor's eyes became pools of starlight. A group of faculty members have been watching certain students evaluating their potential contributions to this crisis. Your name has come up repeatedly. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. You want me to present my theory to the council? I want you to be ready when the opportunity arises. Continue your research, but also begin thinking about practical applications. If you're correct about the nature of the threat, then you may also be correct about the nature of the solution. The professor began to fade, becoming more light than substance. Oh, and Miss Chen? You might want to consider forming study groups with some of your classmates. Even the ones who mock you now may prove valuable allies when they understand what's at stake. As Professor Veltar disappeared entirely, Sarah was left alone with her thoughts and the weight of possibility. Around her, the vast library hummed with the quiet sounds of learning, of minds grappling with the challenges of their time. For the first time since arriving at the academy, Sarah felt like she truly belonged here. Not because she was accepted by her peers, but because she had work to do that mattered. The galaxy might not know it yet, but humanity's greatest contribution to the Confederation might not be technology or military might. It might be the simple, revolutionary idea that different beings could choose to become something greater together than they ever were apart. Sarah's opportunity came sooner than expected, though not in the way she had imagined. The emergency assembly alarm echoed through the academy's corridors at 0347 local time, dragging students from their sleep with urgent harmonics that made universal translators unnecessary. Sarah stumbled into the common area with hundreds of others, still wearing her sleep clothes, trying to understand the chaos around her. Professor Kethvar stood at the front of the massive assembly hall, his crystalline form pulsing with agitation. Behind him, a holographic display showed a star map with a new, growing void where the Proxima Centauri system had been just hours before. The Devourers have advanced ahead of all projections, Professor Kethvar announced, his harmonic voice cutting through the frightened murmurs. They have consumed the entire Proxima system, including its 3 inhabited worlds. 27 billion lives lost in approximately 4 hours. Gasps echoed throughout the hall. Proxima Centauri was only 47 light-years from Earth, well within the inner boundaries of the Confederation. The Devourers weren't supposed to reach core systems for another 2 years. All Academy students from affected sectors will be evacuated immediately, the professor continued. Emergency transports are being prepared. However, the Confederation Council has made an unprecedented decision. The display changed, showing the Academy itself surrounded by defensive formations. Sarah's blood went cold as she realized what she was seeing. The Academy will serve as a final research facility, Professor Kethvar explained. Our most brilliant faculty and students will work together in one last attempt to find a solution before the Devourers reach the galactic core. Participation is voluntary. Those who choose to remain will have access to every database, every research facility, every piece of technology the Confederation possesses. That's suicide, Braktos shouted from the Corvin section. You're asking us to die for a lost cause. Professor Kethvar's crystals darkened. I am asking you to choose whether you want to face the end of civilization while running, or while fighting for something better. The hall erupted in arguments. Students from different species clustered together, some demanding immediate evacuation, others arguing for staying. Sarah stood frozen in the middle of it all, her mind racing. This was it. This was her chance to test her theory under real conditions. But the cost of being wrong was unimaginable. I'll stay. Her voice was barely above a whisper, lost in the chaos. But somehow Professor Kethavar heard her. His compound eyes found her across the crowded hall, and he nodded once. I'll stay too, called another voice. Sarah turned in surprise to see Zixathera slithering forward, her reptilian features set in grim determination. If there's a chance to strike back at these monsters, I want to be part of it. More voices joined in. Grextar stepped forward, his massive frame casting shadows over smaller students. The Corvin Empire does not flee from worthy battles. Even some of the ethereal Xanathi began volunteering, their translucent forms brightening with resolve. Within an hour, nearly half the student body had chosen to remain. The next few days blurred together in a frenzy of preparation. The academy transformed from an educational institution into a fortress laboratory. Heavy defensive systems emerged from hidden installations, while research equipment was rushed in from across the Confederation. The greatest minds of dozens of species gathered in one location for what many believed would be their final collaboration. Sarah found herself assigned to a mixed species team, tasked with analyzing devourer attack patterns. To her surprise, the group included several of her former tormentors, including Vraktos and Zixthara. The crisis had a way of making old conflicts seem petty. Your human pattern recognition software is surprisingly sophisticated, Grextar admitted grudgingly as they worked through the night. Our analysis improved significantly after incorporating your algorithms. Humans are good at seeing connections, Sarah replied, trying to hide her satisfaction. It's how we survived on a world full of predators bigger and stronger than us. Zixthara looked up from her data analysis. I owe you an apology, human. I mocked your emotional responses, but I'm beginning to understand they serve a purpose. Your species processes information differently than the rest of us. How so? You consider factors we dismiss as irrelevant. Motivation, sacrifice, hope, fear. The reptilian's forked tongue flicked thoughtfully. These elements appear frequently in your tactical models. We thought it was primitive thinking, but it may be more complete thinking. Sarah felt a warm glow of vindication, but also a growing sense of urgency. Her research into the devourers had continued, and her theories were becoming more refined. But she still needed proof, and time was running out. The breakthrough came during the fourth night of intensive collaboration. Sarah was working alone in the quantum mechanics lab, running simulations of her unity theory, when the equations suddenly clicked into place. Oh, she whispered, staring at the results. Oh no. The devourers weren't just feeding on individualism. They were feeding on the quantum field fluctuations that individualism created. Every unique consciousness in the universe generated tiny distortions in the fundamental fabric of reality. Separately, these distortions were insignificant, but when billions of individual minds existed in proximity without true connection, the accumulated quantum noise became a beacon that drew the devourers like moths to flame. The solution was terrifyingly simple and impossibly difficult. Every sentient being in the galaxy would need to achieve perfect unity of purpose, synchronizing their consciousness in a way that eliminated the quantum noise while preserving individual identity. It was like asking an orchestra of alien musicians to play a symphony they had never heard, in perfect harmony, while each retained their unique musical voice. Sarah ran the calculations 3 times, then a 4th. The mathematics were sound, but the practical requirements were staggering. This level of unity had never been achieved between different species, had rarely been achieved even within single species. But it could work. The simulation showed that a properly unified field would not only stop feeding the devourers, it would actually cause them pain. For the first time in galactic history, there would be a weapon that could truly hurt them. Sarah saved her work and sat back, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she had discovered. The fate of trillions of lives might depend on convincing the most diverse, fractious, and prideful collection of species in the galaxy to trust each other completely. She thought about her human ancestors, about the crews who had sacrificed themselves at Kepler 442b, about all the times in human history when impossible unity had been achieved in the face of extinction. Maybe it was impossible. But humans had built their entire civilization on achieving the impossible. Sarah activated her communication system, and sent a priority message to Professor HFY. It was time to find out if the galaxy was ready to learn what humans had always known, that sometimes the only way to survive was to stop being individuals and choose to become something greater together. Outside the lab windows, the stars continued their ancient dance, beautiful and cold. Somewhere among them, the Devourers continued their relentless advance. But for the first time since the crisis began, Sarah felt a spark of genuine hope. The galaxy might not know it yet, but humanity was about to teach the universe its most important lesson. The emergency session of the Confederation Council convened in the Academy's largest amphitheater, hastily converted to accommodate representatives from 43 species. Sarah stood at the back of the room, her heart hammering as she watched the most powerful beings in the galaxy file into their designated sections. Towering Corvan generals sat beside ethereal Xanathi philosophers, while crystalline Altarian scientists conversed in harmonic tones with cybernetic nexus delegates. Professor HFY had spent 3 days reviewing Sarah's research, consulting with colleagues and running independent verification protocols. His conclusion had been both thrilling and terrifying. Her theory was not only sound, it was the first genuine hope the Confederation had discovered in decades of fighting the Devourers. Honored delegates, Chancellor Mordun began, his ancient Altarian form glowing with the deep blues and purples of extreme age. We face the end of our civilization. Traditional responses have failed. We gather now to consider unconventional solutions. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. The word unconventional was rarely spoken with approval in galactic politics, where tradition and precedent held sacred weight. The proposal before us comes from an unexpected source, the Chancellor continued, a student researcher whose species joined our Confederation only 50 years ago. However, her work has been verified by our most respected faculty members. Sarah felt hundreds of alien gazes turned toward her, some curious, some skeptical, many openly hostile. She recognized the expression on Corvan faces that indicated disdain, the way reptilian tongues flicked in dismissal, the dimming of Xanathi luminescence that suggested disagreement. A human child? General Thecamore of the Corvan 6th Fleet stood, his massive frame making nearby delegates appear toy-like. We're considering military strategy from a species that learned faster than light travel from us. This is desperate beyond reason. Perhaps, Professor HFY interjected smoothly. General Thecamore would like to share the Corvan military success rate against the Devourers? The general's thick hide flushed darker. Corvan forces had suffered catastrophic losses in every engagement with the enemy. That is irrelevant. Experience and wisdom cannot be replaced by youthful enthusiasm. Then let us examine the wisdom of experience, Chancellor Mordun said diplomatically. Miss Chen, please present your findings. Sarah's legs felt like water as she made her way to the central speaking platform. The amphitheater's acoustics were designed for harmonic Altarian voices, and she worried her human speech patterns would be lost in the vast space. Honored delegates, she began, her voice smaller than she intended. For 73 years we have fought the Devourers with weapons designed to destroy matter and energy. We have failed because the Devourers exist primarily in quantum space. She activated the holographic display, showing her carefully prepared visualizations. Every conscious being generates quantum field fluctuations through the act of individual thought. When billions of separate minds exist in proximity without true unity, these fluctuations create quantum noise that feeds the Devourers. The display showed swirling patterns of energy, beautiful and terrifying in their complexity. They don't consume matter directly. They consume the discord between conscious beings, the separation that exists when individuals refuse to truly connect with each other. Preposterous. Senator Velkoth of the reptilian hegemony rose, her scales bristling with indignation. You suggest consciousness itself attracts these monsters? Not consciousness, Sarah corrected, fighting to keep her voice steady. Disconnected consciousness. The Devourers are drawn to quantum signatures created by beings who think only of themselves, who cannot see beyond their own species, their own interests. She changed the display to show the systems the Devourers had bypassed. These worlds survived because their populations achieved true unity. Not political alliance, not trade agreements, but genuine harmony of purpose. The Sethrak hive minds, the symbiotic Talnari, species that think as one while remaining individuals. And you propose we all become hive minds? General Thecamore's tone dripped with contempt. Sacrifice our individuality to these monsters? No. Sarah's voice grew stronger, fed by conviction. I propose we learn to choose unity while preserving what makes each of us unique. Humans have a word for this: harmony. Different voices singing together to create something beautiful. The amphitheater erupted in voices, translations, harmonic overtones, and biochemical communications, creating a cacophony of discord. Sarah watched the chaos with growing despair. They were proving her point about disconnected consciousness, but not in a helpful way. Silence. Chancellor Morden's ancient voice carried harmonics that penetrated every translation matrix in the room. The noise died instantly. Miss Chen, explain the practical application of your theory. Sarah took a deep breath. We create a quantum consciousness field linking every sentient being in the galaxy. Not a hive mind, but a network of individual minds choosing to work together. The unified field would eliminate the quantum noise that feeds the devourers and create a resonance pattern that causes them pain. Impossible, declared Archon Zethras of the Zenathi Collective. The technical requirements alone would take decades to implement. Not with human neural architecture. Professor Veltar materialized at the edge of the speaking platform, her Veil Walker abilities allowing her to appear without notice. Human brains are uniquely suited to rapid consciousness bridging. They can serve as quantum relays for other species. The implication hit the assembly like a shockwave. Every delegate understood what Professor Veltar was suggesting. Humans would have to sacrifice themselves to save the galaxy, becoming living conduits for an unprecedented joining of minds. You ask us to trust our consciousness to humans? Senator Velkoth's voice held undisguised revulsion. A species we barely consider civilized? Sarah felt the familiar sting of dismissal, but this time it was accompanied by something else. Fierce determination. Yes, Senator. You're being asked to trust the species that every other race in this room has mocked, dismissed, and treated as inferior. She stepped forward, addressing the entire assembly. You want to know why humans can do this when you can't? Because we've spent our entire history learning to work with beings who despise us. We know how to find common ground with enemies. We know how to sacrifice for others who wouldn't do the same for us. Her voice rose, carrying across the vast amphitheater. Every human who volunteers for this mission knows they'll probably die. We know that even if we succeed, even if we save every world in this galaxy, most of you will go back to treating us like primitive curiosities, and we're willing to do it anyway. The silence that followed was profound. Sarah could see delegates considering her words, perhaps for the first time truly seeing humans as something other than a galactic footnote. The mathematics are sound, Professor Kethavar said quietly. Independent verification confirms Miss Chen's calculations. A unified consciousness field would indeed repel the devourers. And the cost? General Thekmore asked. Every human in the galaxy would need to participate, Professor Veltar replied. They would serve as living quantum bridges, linking consciousness across species barriers. The neural strain would be significant. Another way of saying fatal, Sarah realized. But the galaxy didn't need to hear that part yet. Chancellor Mordun's ancient crystals cycled through deep contemplation patterns. Miss Chen, do you believe your species would volunteer for such a mission? Sarah thought about her fellow humans scattered across the galaxy, scientists and traders, explorers and diplomats. All of them used to being underestimated, all of them carrying the quiet pride of a species that had clawed its way to the stars against impossible odds. Yes, she said simply, we would, even knowing the cost, especially knowing the cost. Sarah's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. That's what humans do. We choose to be more than we are even when it costs us everything. The vote that followed was closer than anyone had expected. 43 species, their representatives wrestling with pride, fear, desperation, and hope. In the end, it passed by a single vote. The deciding ballot cast by a young Zenathi delegate who had been following Sarah's research. As the assembly dispersed to implement the most desperate plan in galactic history, Sarah remained on the platform, overwhelmed by what she had set in motion. Professor Kethvar approached, his crystals glowing with what might have been pride. Miss Chen, do you understand what you've accomplished today? I've probably doomed my entire species, Sarah replied quietly. But I've given the galaxy a chance. You've done more than that. The professor's harmonic voice carried gentle harmonics. You've reminded us what it means to be truly civilized. Perhaps when this is over, the galaxy will remember that lesson. Sarah nodded, already thinking about the massive coordination effort ahead. Millions of humans would need to be contacted, convinced, and prepared for a mission unlike anything in galactic history. But for the first time since the Devourers had appeared, the galaxy had hope. And that hope wore a human face. The preparation phase lasted only 6 days, though it felt like a lifetime compressed into desperate hours. Across the galaxy, human settlements received priority communications explaining the mission that would either save civilization or destroy humanity as a species. Sarah had expected resistance, fear, perhaps even outright refusal from many communities. Instead, the response was overwhelming. 97% volunteer rate, reported Captain Maria Santos, the human liaison officer who had arrived with the first wave of volunteers. From colony worlds to deep space stations, from Earth cities to the frontier settlements, they're coming, Sarah. All of them. Sarah stood in the Academy's main coordination center, watching transport ships arrive in steady streams. Each vessel carried volunteers who knew they were flying toward almost certain death. Scientists and farmers, teachers and miners, children barely old enough to understand what they were volunteering for, and elders who had lived through humanity's first contact with the galaxy. I don't understand it, Zixthera admitted, working beside Sarah at one of the quantum coordination terminals. The reptilian had become an unexpected ally, her analytical mind proving invaluable in coordinating the consciousness-bridging technology. Why do they come so willingly? Don't humans value their individual lives? More than anything, Sarah replied, fine-tuning the neural interface protocols. That's exactly why they're here. The question was being asked throughout the Academy, as alien observers struggled to comprehend the human response. Corvin military psychologists had predicted no more than 30% participation. Xanathi sociologists had calculated that advanced species prioritized self-preservation above species preservation. Even the Altarian probability matrices had suggested widespread resistance to the mission. They had all been wrong. Sarah's brother David had arrived on the 3rd day, despite her frantic messages telling him to stay on Earth. He found her in the neural calibration lab, running final tests on the consciousness-bridging equipment that would link human minds to their alien counterparts. You should be home, Sarah told him, not looking up from her work. You have a family. Jenny needs you, the kids need you. The kids need a future, David replied calmly. Jenny understands. So do Marcus and little Elena. They're proud their dad gets to help save the galaxy. Sarah finally looked at her brother, seeing the same quiet determination that had carried their species from the caves of Earth to the stars. David, the mortality rate for neural bridging is over 90%. We're not heroes, we're sacrifices. Sarah. David put his hands on her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. Do you remember what Dad used to say about the difference between humans and everyone else? She nodded, tears threatening. Everyone else tries to be special. Humans try to be better. Exactly. And sometimes being better means choosing to die so others can live. He smiled, the same lopsided grin that had gotten him in trouble as a child. Besides, you think I'm letting my baby sister save the galaxy without me? Mom would never forgive me. The preparations accelerated as more volunteers arrived. The Academy's laboratories worked around the clock to modify consciousness-bridging technology for unprecedented scale. Every human volunteer underwent neural mapping, their brain patterns analyzed and cataloged for optimal pairing with alien counterparts. The alien delegates watched with growing amazement and, in some cases, shame. General Techmore approached Sarah during the 4th day of preparations, his massive frame unusually subdued. Human Chen, he said formally, I owe you an apology. The Corvin High Command has analyzed your species' response to this mission. We are impressed. Thank you, General. Sarah didn't pause in her work calibrating neural interfaces. But I don't need your approval anymore. Perhaps not. But you have it nonetheless. The General's thick hide shifted to deeper colors, indicating serious contemplation. Your species displays courage that my warriors study in theoretical contexts. To face certain death for uncertain victory with no promise of glory or remembrance, this is the highest form of bravery. Similar conversations were happening throughout the Academy. Species that had dismissed humanity for decades were forced to confront the reality that the primitive newcomers possessed qualities they had forgotten or never developed. The technical challenges were staggering. Each human volunteer would need to maintain neural bridges with multiple alien consciousnesses simultaneously, creating a network that spanned the entire galaxy. The quantum calculations alone filled entire databases, but the human volunteers studied them with fierce determination. I still don't understand the harmonics for Xanathi consciousness integration, complained Jennifer Walsh, a former teacher from the Mars colonies. Their thought patterns are completely different from ours. Think of it like learning a new language, suggested Dr. Park, a neuroscientist from Earth's Asian Collective. You don't change who you are, you just learn to communicate in their mental vocabulary. Sarah moved between training groups, helping volunteers prepare for the most complex mental integration ever attempted. She watched farmers from agricultural worlds struggling with advanced quantum mechanics, saw artists from the Luna settlements mastering alien psychology protocols, observed children too young for military service practicing meditation techniques that would help them maintain mental stability, while bridging consciousness across species barriers. They were magnificent. Professor Veltar appeared beside Sarah during one of the training sessions, her veil walker nature allowing her to observe without disrupting the delicate concentration exercises. Your species continues to surprise us, she said quietly. Even our most optimistic projections didn't account for this level of voluntary participation. That's because you were thinking like galactic citizens, Sarah replied. We're still thinking like humans. Explain. Sarah gestured to the training sessions around them. Every other species in the galaxy measures success by how much they can gain for themselves. Humans measure success by how much we can give for others. It's not wisdom, it's not strategy, it's just who we are. The professor's shimmer brightened with something like wonder. And you believe this will be enough? Against an enemy that has defeated the combined might of the Confederation? I believe, Sarah said firmly, that the Devourers have never faced anything like us before. They feed on discord, on separation, on the gaps between consciousness. But when humans choose to connect with others, really connect, there are no gaps. The final day of preparation arrived with reports that the Devourers had consumed 3 more systems. They were now less than a week away from the galactic core, their advance having accelerated beyond all projections. Time was running out. Sarah stood in the primary coordination chamber surrounded by thousands of human volunteers and their alien partners. The consciousness bridging equipment hummed with barely contained energy, quantum field generators creating patterns that hurt to look at directly. All stations report ready, Captain Santos announced. Neural interfaces are online, quantum field generators are synchronized, and consciousness bridging protocols are active. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of an entire galaxy's hope pressing down on her shoulders. In a few hours, they would know if humanity's greatest gamble had succeeded, or if they had simply created the largest funeral pyre in galactic history. Begin the integration sequence, she commanded. Around her, 10,000 human minds reached out across impossible distances, bridging the gaps between species that had never truly connected before. The galaxy held its breath as humanity proved once more that sometimes the most impossible things were simply a matter of choosing to care more about others than yourself. The moment consciousness bridging achieved full synchronization, Sarah felt her individual identity stretch across impossible distances. Her mind touched those of beings she had never imagined possible. The crystal song thoughts of Altarian mathematicians, the deep stone patience of Corvan warriors, the light dance consciousness of Xanathi philosophers. Through David's neural link, she felt his connection to a young reptilian engineer on Vega Prime. Through Jennifer Walsh, she experienced the controlled aggression of a Corvan general who had lost 3 fleets to the Devourers. Through 10,000 other human minds, she touched the consciousness of species she had only read about in textbooks. The sensation was overwhelming and beautiful and terrible all at once, but it worked. Quantum field resonance achieved, reported Dr. Park, though his voice seemed to come from very far away. Consciousness integration holding steady across all linked systems. Sarah felt the galaxy's mind awakening for the first time in its history. Not a hive mind, but something unprecedented. Billions of individual consciousness choosing to sing in harmony while retaining their unique voices. The quantum noise that had fed the Devourers for eons suddenly transformed into something else entirely. Music. The Devourers felt it immediately. Across the galaxy, their ships stopped their relentless advance, their reality-consuming mechanisms faltering as the quantum field they fed upon was replaced by organized, harmonious energy that burned them like acid. It's working, Sarah whispered, though she wasn't sure if she spoke aloud or through the consciousness network. They're retreating, but the cost was becoming apparent. Human volunteers throughout the galaxy were collapsing as their neural systems overloaded, from maintaining bridges between fundamentally incompatible forms of consciousness. Sarah felt David's presence flickering as his mind struggled to maintain connection with the reptilian engineer. Hold on, she urged through their shared link. Just a little longer. The Devourers weren't simply retreating. They were screaming. Their ships began to vibrate at frequencies that shattered normal matter, their dark hulls cracking and spilling impossible energies into space. For the first time since they had appeared in galactic space, the Devourers were experiencing pain. Sarah. Professor Kethvar's voice reached her through the Academy's communication system. The Devourer ships in the Centauri sector are beginning to collapse. Whatever you're doing, it's working beyond our best projections. But Sarah could feel the network straining. Human minds were never designed to process alien consciousness for extended periods. Across the galaxy, volunteers were dying as their neural systems burned out from the impossible load they carried. She felt Jennifer Walsh's presence fade as the teacher from Mars gave everything she had to maintain connection with the Xanathi collective. Dr. Park's consciousness wavered as he channeled the mathematical songs of 3 Altarian research stations. One by one, the human volunteers were sacrificing themselves to keep the network stable. "We're losing too many," Captain Santos reported, her voice strained. "Neural burnout is exceeding projections." "Then we need to finish this quickly," Sarah replied. Through the consciousness network, she could feel the Devourer's alien intelligence for the first time. They were not evil in any way humans understood. They were simply hungry, feeding on the discord between consciousness much as predators fed on prey. But they had never encountered unified consciousness before, had never experienced the harmony of different minds choosing to work together. The unified galactic consciousness was poison to them. Sarah felt David's mind beginning to fracture under the strain. Across their neural link, she sensed his determination to hold on, to maintain his bridge with the reptilian engineer no matter the cost. "David, let go," she urged. "You've done enough." "Not yet," he replied, though his mental voice was growing weak. "The engineer, her name is Sisara. She has younglings. I can see them in her thoughts. They need their mother to survive." That was humanity in a nutshell, Sarah realized. Even while dying, David was more concerned about an alien family he had never met than his own survival. The Devourer retreat accelerated as more of their ships succumbed to the harmonious quantum field. But they were learning, adapting, trying to find ways to feed on the unity itself. The network had to hold until every Devourer ship was forced beyond the galactic rim. "Incoming transmission from Devourer Command," reported the Academy's communication center. "They're trying to establish contact." "Put it through," Sarah commanded. The signal that came through the communication array was unlike anything in galactic records. Not voice or light or electromagnetic radiation, but pure consciousness projected across space. When the Academy's computers managed to translate it, the message was simple. "Why do you choose unity when discord brings strength?" Sarah felt the entire galaxy waiting for her response. Through the consciousness network, she could feel the amazement of species that had never truly cooperated before, the wonder of minds that had discovered they could be more together than apart. "Because," she replied, speaking for all of them, "being strong alone means nothing if you end up alone." The Devourer response came immediately. "You will die for this choice." "Maybe," Sarah admitted. "But we'll die as something greater than we were. You'll die as the same hungry darkness you've always been." The silence that followed lasted exactly 47 seconds. Then across the galaxy, every Devourer ship began to flee toward the empty spaces between galactic clusters. They moved faster than they ever had before, as if the very presence of unified consciousness caused them physical pain. The retreat continued for 6 hours before the last Devourer vessel crossed beyond the galactic rim. Only then did Sarah begin the careful process of shutting down the consciousness network. The cost had been staggering. Of the 10,000 human volunteers, fewer than 300 survived the neural bridging process. David was not among them. Sarah felt his consciousness fade during the final hour, his last thoughts focused on ensuring Sisara's safe return to her younglings. But the galaxy was free. In the days that followed, as news of humanity's sacrifice spread throughout the Confederation, something unprecedented occurred. Species that had regarded humans as primitive curiosities began to see them as something else entirely. Heroes. The memorial service was held at the Academy, attended by representatives from every member world. Sarah, one of the few human survivors, stood before the assembled delegates with burns across half her face from neural feedback, her left arm hanging useless from quantum field exposure. "They saved us all," Chancellor Morden announced, his ancient crystals glowing with deep respect. Not for glory, not for gain, but because they chose to see the galaxy as worth saving. General Thekmore stepped forward, his massive frame somehow managing to convey humility. The Corvan High Command wishes to propose immediate elevation of humanity to senior member status in the Confederation. Their sacrifice has earned them a voice in galactic governance. Similar proposals came from species after species, each offering humanity the respect and recognition they had been denied for 50 years. Sarah listened to it all with mixed emotions. The recognition was gratifying, but it came at a price her species could never truly afford to pay again. "Thank you," she said when asked to respond. "But humanity doesn't need senior member status. We just need to be remembered for who we really were." She gestured to the memorial wall where 10,000 names glowed in soft light. "These people didn't die to prove we deserved respect. They died because they saw beings in trouble and chose to help. That's what humans do. That's what we've always done." Professor Kethvar approached her after the ceremony, his crystals cycling through patterns of deep contemplation. "Miss Chen, what will humanity do now? Your species has proven itself capable of unimaginable sacrifice. The galaxy will look to you for leadership," Sarah smiled, thinking of the human colonies scattered across the galaxy, of children growing up among the stars, of the endless human drive to explore and discover and connect with others. "We'll do what we've always done, Professor. We'll try to be better than we are. We'll make mistakes, learn from them, and try to help others do the same." She looked up at the stars visible through the Academy's transparent dome, "And maybe, if we're very lucky, we'll teach the galaxy that being different doesn't mean being separate." The galaxy had been saved by humanity's greatest weakness, their inability to stop caring about others, even when it cost them everything. In the end, it had proven to be their greatest strength years later. When xenohistorians studied the Devourer War, they would mark it as the moment the galaxy truly became a confederation rather than just an alliance. They would note that humanity's sacrifice had created bonds between species that had never existed before. But Sarah knew the real victory was simpler than that. For the first time in galactic history, billions of different beings had chosen to trust each other completely. They had learned that unity didn't require uniformity, that being stronger together was worth any individual cost. It was the most human lesson imaginable. That sometimes the greatest strength comes from admitting you need others, and that sometimes the most important victories are won not by being right, but by choosing to care. The class had laughed at her once, dismissing humans as primitive and weak.